and thank you for joining us for the Church Alive Kingdom Families Life Group discussion session. And today I've got Caroline joining me. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Pastor D. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. It's great to have you with us. Are you well?
Thank you for having me. I'm well, thank you.
And so Caroline has been part of our Church Alive family and is now on our staff team. And we're going to be talking a little bit about different kinds of conflict. And we're going to get quite practical to give you some practical tips on how you can address conflict in the various areas in your world. And also some tips on how you can help build unity and build peace in all of your different environments. So firstly, if you haven't yet done so, I really want to encourage you to watch Pastor Johan's session on conflict. There are some very practical steps on how we can build unity and overcome conflict. But today, we're going to be looking at some of the practical ways that we've applied some of those principles in our context. So for me, I'm married. I've definitely experienced conflict in marriage because I'm married to a human being, you know. We are sometimes surprised when we hear that there's conflict, but as soon as you've got two humans in a room, there's going to be something that might cause a misunderstanding or a disagreement, right, Caroline?
Definitely.
So I've experienced that in marriage. I've also experienced that with my children. Seeing them grow up to the different life stages has brought different kinds of conflict, from the terrible twos right through to teenage conflicts, and then other conflicts like possibly with friends or in a work context. So those are some of the areas that I'm going to be sharing a little bit of my journey. Tell us about your context, Caroline.
I'm going to be sharing about conflict within families from a child's perspective, and also conflicts of a young adult who's in a dating world. Yeah.
Okay, so you're at the moment living with your mom and your sister, right?
Yes, I am.
And yet you are an independent adult making decisions for yourself.
Yes.
So I find that quite interesting because for me, I'm on the other side of the spectrum where I've got 3 young adult sons. And I think for me as a parent, one of the hardest transitions was recognizing that the seasons are changing and that I need to give them more autonomy in their lives while still respecting the family dynamics. So I'm going to share a little bit about how we did it in our home, and then maybe you can share a little bit about how you manage in your home. So one of the things that we found quite tricky is that teenagers wanted complete independence, in our opinion, too young. And we had to regularly touch sides with our children as they were growing up to say what were the areas that they could or couldn't make decisions, particularly regarding to things like going out or spending money and things like that. How did you handle those kind of conflicts in your home?
Sure. Firstly, when I was a teenager, I thought I was completely independent. I thought I could live alone from the age of 16, but that's not the case. So I think just sitting and having a conversation and just talking about how somebody's actions made me feel or how my actions made somebody feel was a better way of dealing with it rather than fighting over the issue. And
you raise a very important point there, that feelings very often get involved in a conflict.
Yes.
And that can really escalate things, right?
Yes, definitely. Because if we're all fighting and everybody's feeling a certain way and nobody's willing to listen to the other, but I think it's important to understand that your actions can affect other people's feelings and their actions can also affect you.
So practically, what sort of guidelines would you give for somebody on, what does the Bible say about that? How do we respect other people's feelings? What should we be doing?
On a practical level, I feel like communicating how you feel is better because there's no way another person would know how you feel if you don't say that, okay, listen, you did this and this is how it made me feel. Sometimes people don't take notice of what they've done and how it made you feel unless you tell them.
And won't you read with us the verse in James that we were discussing a little earlier?
Oh, yes.
Which is very practical, I think, when it comes to how to handle conflict in a constructive way. Because, as you say, we need to express feelings, but how do we do that?
Okay, so James 1 verse 19 says, "Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. So get rid of all the filth and evil in your lives and humbly accept the word God has planted in your hearts, for it has the power to save your souls.
Well, that is such a powerful verse. There's
It
so
is.
much in there.
It is, definitely.
And I think the first instruction for me is that I need to be quick to listen. And particularly as a mom, I kind of often went into speaking and instructing mode, and I had to be intentional to learn to listen. Quick to listen, slow to speak, and also slow to get angry. Now, in our home, our different sons have got different ways of responding to conflict. One of my sons he loses his temper and you know that he's upset. My other son withdraws. And so we found that we had to find a way to make sure that everybody's thoughts and feelings were respected. And I think that verse is such a good guideline for that. So we've probably done this maybe 4 or 5 times in the last 10 years, that we had tensions escalate to the point where we decided we need to have a family meeting. So I'll tell you about the one particular day. I was picking my sons up from the gym. They had gone for a gym session, and I was on my way home from work, and I was delayed because of work crisis. And when I finally got there to fetch them, one of my sons, I won't tell you which one, he yelled at me like, "Mom, we've been waiting here for so long, and why did you make us wait? And this is unacceptable." Well, don't say the word unacceptable to a mom. Handy tip for teenagers. I immediately lost my temper. James says we shouldn't get angry. Well, I got angry, and I was seething mad. And then I remembered I need to be quick to listen, slow to speak. And then it talks about slow to get angry. What do you do when you actually are angry? I knew I was angry. And I've learned that when I'm angry, that's not the time to speak. And so I said to them, "Listen, guys, we are going to take some time to talk this through, but not right now." And so we drove home. There were definite storm clouds over all of our heads. I went and prepared supper. We had supper. I think most of it was in silence. And then afterwards, we sat down. And our rules for our family meeting is, firstly, we give a time limit, where we say that we may not be interrupted. We normally set an hour to 2 hours to say that nobody gets cell phone interruptions or anything for that time. And then each person is given a chance to speak without being interrupted. And it's hard, especially when there's 5 of you in the family, because if you're number 5 speaking, it means you've had to listen to 4 people give you their opinions on what the issue is and how to fix it. And that's where that James verse is so practical. We've got to be quick to listen. Sometimes we've got to be patient to listen. And we've got to listen really, really well. And the good news is, each one of those family meetings had a very positive outcome. Sometimes there were elements of facts that we had misinterpreted or misunderstood. Sometimes there were feelings that had been overlooked or hadn't been taken into consideration. But in every situation, we were able to reach that point where we understood where the other person was coming from, and we were able to work towards a practical solution. So there's a sneak peek into our personal lives. How do you handle things in your family, Caroline?
I don't know. I find it so hard to handle conflict most of the time. Sometimes I just want to go and sleep because I can't deal with this right now. But I think it's important that I've learned to understand that maybe I'm in the wrong and we need to sit down and resolve it, because if you don't, then it builds up. And you know, when you have siblings, she's going to remind you one day that, listen, you did this. And you're going to be like, but I thought we were past that. But you really weren't past it because you didn't discuss it. You didn't address it. Nobody apologized. So yeah, I think sitting down and saying, I think I've had conflicts with my little sister, and she's 15 and she's very opinionated and she thinks the world revolves around her, but she's my sister. And yeah, so we've had conflicts, and then we'd end up sitting down, and then I'd say, listen, I didn't like what you did here and here. And she would come and say, no, but I didn't like what you did here and here. And I'm like, but why? Because I was responding to the way that you acted. And then we'd have a discussion about how it made her feel and how it made me feel. And then we'd find common ground and eventually apologize. Because I think there's no way that we can move on if we don't apologize. And I really hate to come to the point where I have to say, oh no, but then the last time you did this and then the last time you did that. I think it's not cool as a family to live in an environment where you're actually sitting there and you're resenting one another and you're not saying anything about it, you know.
And I think it's so important, those points that you're raising, where once you've heard one another out, there often needs to be an apology.
Yes.
And I've learned a lot with apologies. Sometimes you apologize for something that you did wrong. Sometimes you apologize because the relationship itself has been broken.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might even apologize for reacting in a particular way.
Sure.
But it's not so easy if the other person isn't willing to apologize, or if the other person doesn't agree that there was, that they had done anything wrong.
Sure.
And that's sometimes where we get a bit of a stalemate. And I think for me, what we've agreed on is that we've got to look at the good of the whole family, or in a marriage context, we've got to put the marriage above the individual person. I heard a beautiful statement when we were newly married where they said, sometimes when you win, you lose. And sometimes you might win an argument, but you've lost the relationship.
Sure.
And we would rather lose a point on an argument for the sake of the relationship, to say, you know what, you and I saw that differently, but let's agree that moving forward we will do whatever we're going to do. And then comes that other very important point where you said about forgiveness. Tell us a little bit more about forgiveness.
I think I've learned over time that forgiveness isn't really about me. You know, you can still be offended and forgive somebody at the end of the day, because I feel like normally I'm like, no, you know what, I can't do this. But then I realize that I also do wrong things, and then I also want people to forgive me. And I know that if I did something to somebody and then they said, you know what, I'm not forgiving you, I would feel very bad.
Yes.
I wouldn't feel good. I wouldn't feel loved. And that's not how we want people to feel. And that's not how we also want to feel. So I've learned to forgive others, because I know that I'm also going to be doing wrong to other people, and I'm also going to want to be forgiven. And oftentimes you don't do something wrong intentionally. And I think nobody would hurt you intentionally. So I think, I've learned to just forgive and move on.
And it ties into what 1 Corinthians 13 says about love. It says love keeps no record of wrongs. And as we forgive, we don't just forgive because we've been forgiven, but we also forgive because we love. I want to read another verse for us, and that is from Matthew 5 verse 9, which says, God blesses those who work for peace. Some translations say, blessed are the peacemakers.
Sure.
And this is the promise. It says, for they will be called the children of God. And I think that's so powerful. You know, we're talking about family context or relationship context, and we want to be children of God.
Sure.
When we are in God's house, He wants us to work towards peace. And sometimes peace means fighting it out. And sometimes peace means agreeing to disagree and finding common ground, as you mentioned, so that we can live together in harmony.
Yes.
So as we look at some other practical contexts, what do you do with maybe somebody in your home who's not a believer, or maybe in a work context, you've got conflict with somebody, and you don't have the common ground of your faith to resolve that conflict? What sort of advice would you give in that context?
For example, if it's like a workplace setting and it's not like everybody's not a Christian, so we don't all have the same faith. I think the fact that we actually have to work together every day is common ground. And we can't work together if we're always angry at each other. And also, I think, wanting to be at peace when you're at work is a nice way of describing the situation to the person that you're having conflict with. For example, when you're talking to them, you can tell them that, look, I don't want to come to work to fight with you. I actually want to come to work and have fun and be happy and, just work well together. And I think that could be an example of common ground. And an example of somebody in the family, I think they just have to understand that we live together, we have to get along. Honestly, we cannot be fighting when we live together.
Yeah.
So definitely.
And sometimes the things that we fight about can be incredibly petty when we look at the big important things.
Yes. And insignificant.
Yeah. And I think that also ties into something else which we found really helpful, is that you mentioned about having fun and enjoying time together.
Yes.
As a family, we need to spend time together doing things we enjoy, not just working through issues.
True.
And so one of the things that we love doing as a family, we love eating out, eating together at home. Food is such a great way to get together and to regularly make time to get together as a family, eat around the dinner table. We try and do it at least 3 or 4 times in the week. When our children were young, we did it every day, morning and evening,
Wow.
where we ate together and we build that relationship. And then when the issues come up, you've got that foundation of relationship to build on. Yeah. You've got another verse you wanted to share with us.
Yes. Actually, we've heard this a lot for the past few weeks. Pastor Jay has been preaching on it. Ephesians 6, verse 1 to 4. Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do. Honor your mother and your father. This is the first commandment with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well for you, and you will live a long life on earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and instructions that come from the Lord. And yeah, this verse is very important to me because I think this is one of the verses that we've been brought up with, my sister and I, and some of my cousins as well. We've been taught from a young age that you should honor your parents.
And honoring parents differentiates between obeying and honoring. So young children, and here we're talking under 12 and under, obey in all circumstances, whether you agree, whether you disagree. But as you enter those teenage years, and particularly like now where you're a young adult, that changes. So what would you say the difference is between honoring versus obeying?
I think obeying, most of the time as a child, I think it's because you know that this is what's right and what's wrong. And even if you have your opinion, you're too young to make a decision for yourself. But I think as a young adult, although you are making decisions for yourself and you are living your own life, you should still respect your parents. You should still live a life that is honoring them. So I think like maybe listening to their advice, maybe when you want to do something. So for example, I want to move out and my mom thinks it's not a great idea. I think sitting down and actually listening to why she thinks it's not a good idea is another way of honoring my mom. So yeah.
And I think another element of honor is the way that we speak to one another. You know, especially when there's conflict, sometimes we let emotions overwhelm us.
Yes.
And we forget that we still need to honor one another, not just as children and parents, but also in the faith. And that's one of the encouragements I want to encourage you guys to do, is to always speak respectfully and try as much as possible not to say things that are going to remain hurtful. Because sometimes you can resolve the conflict, but in a moment of anger, if you speak hurtful words, they're very difficult to retract.
That's very
true. So we need to be respectful and honoring of one another in the way that we process things.
Definitely.
Now, there have been books and courses and many other things written on the topic. There's no ways we can cover everything.
Sure.
So I want to give a couple of recommendations regarding conflict and then regarding life groups. So the first recommendation as far as conflict is concerned is to know when healthy conflict is normal and when it is escalating and when you need extra help. So for me, a guideline is that if there's a conflict that's going to last more than 3 days, that's something where you may need some help, particularly when you've got something that's affecting a relationship. I've seen some families where you've got something that's gone on for weeks sometimes.
Sure.
And that's when there's a warning signal that you need to get some extra help. Maybe you can get a church leader involved, maybe you can see a counselor, but to work through that situation to bring reconciliation. Most conflicts should be resolved within hopefully the same day
Yes,
or within a
hopefully.
week. But if there are conflicts that escalate, get some help. And one of the ways that you can get some help, you can get some input on Right Now Media. There are amazing courses and input that you can get. There's marriage courses. One of the ones, if you're experiencing a lot of conflict in marriage per se, is one called The Crazy Cycle, where we kind of get into that crazy cycle where you're hurt, and so you get angry and you hurt one another, and reversing that crazy cycle to be one where we're building one another up and building trust and rebuilding the relationship. So there's that series that you can look into, and have a look at where you're at in your family relationships, whether it's marriage, whether it's parenting through the different phases. Get some good, solid advice from those who've got a good Bible grounding, and those who've been a little bit ahead of you on the road, to help give you some guidelines to handle each of those situations with the best tools that you can, so that we can build relationships. And then, as we close off, do you have any last words of advice relating to conflict, relating to relationships? And then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about life group plans.
I think, as I spoke about it earlier, just communicate. Because if you don't, then there's not going to be any resolving of the issues, because other people don't know how you feel. Other people can't guess how you feel. So you have to speak to other people and let them know how they made you feel. And also you have to understand how you made other people feel.
And that's so, so important, is that we develop our communication skills and develop those relationships. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Pastor Tia.
So today is officially our last life group series for the Kingdom Family series, but I want to encourage you to continue meeting, whether you're meeting as a family, whether you're meeting as a life group. I want to encourage you to continue meeting regularly. The Bible recommends that we meet in big groups at church, but that we also meet in small groups where we can discuss God's word, where we can be practical and apply it. And so even though this particular series is coming to an end, there are various other things that you can do. So what some life groups do is that they will get together and they will get the notes from the sermon on Sunday, and they may discuss the sermons and how it applies to their lives. Or another option is to maybe have a look for a resource, a series that's on Right Now Media that's relevant to your group, and choose to work through that series together as a group. There is an incredible blessing that comes when we put that time and effort into developing relationships in small group setting. And so that's our hope and prayer for you, that this won't be the end of your journey together, but that you will take some time after this session to make plans for your group going forward. And then as we close off today, if you could take some time to have a look at some discussion questions, just to spark discussion in your group context, and share examples of things that you have had success in, and take some time to pray for one another in areas that you may be experiencing difficulty right now. And I want to assure you that we are praying for you. As a staff team, we pray regularly. We are praying for you, and we are trusting that God is going to build relationships in our families, in our marriages, and in every context, that we're going to see God's blessing as we make peace and as we bring God's kingdom into our world. Thank you for joining us. God bless.